Before I begin, just to reiterate, I know there's probably things that need to be discussed, and it's a social gathering, so we're somewhat encouraged to speak with one another. But I would ask that you, for the next 20 minutes, you please try to focus on the few words that I'm going to share. If perchance the need arises for any conversation, that's completely understandable. And just on behalf of the gathering, I request that you please carry those conversations outside of the hall. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalam ala rasulih al-Kareem. Amma ba'd. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me the honor and pleasure of being a professor of medicine at the Pritzker School of Medicine. And that's at the University of Chicago. And the students at the University of Chicago's medical school are amongst the top in the country. When I sit with my students at the medical school, I sometimes will observe the gathering as the class begins to come together. I see the kids come in from the door. They're carrying their backpacks. They're extremely excited. And they sit down and they're trying to gain whatever knowledge their professor might be sharing with them. But that only tells half of the story. Why is that only half of the story? Because from their perspective, they're sitting as students trying to capture the words of their professor. But from the professor's perspective, from my perspective, when I'm sitting in front of the students, of course, I want my students to gain whatever knowledge I'm sharing. But in addition, I'm scanning the crowd and I'm asking the question, who will carry my mission and assist me in my goals of trying to advance human medicine? There's two perspectives to any gathering. There's the perspective of the student. The student is looking to take whatever they can take in order to benefit, and that's completely understandable. That's their job. But the professor is thinking, I've got this responsibility on my shoulder to educate all these people, and I have a mission to carry on this to the next generation. So which one of these people will one day be able to take my shoes and carry on that mission? And there might be 80 students in the classroom, but it's only a handful that are going to rise to that level of commitment. This is the way that any professor interacts with their students. And I'll tell you, all the professors are the same. I sit with them. These are the people I sit with. These are the people that I meet with. They all have the same concern. But this concern is not unique, even to a great institution like the University of Chicago. Rather, this concern is something that's present in every great institution, and especially in the deen. In fact, if we page through the Quran, we find the example of the Prophet Isa alayhi salam, who's sitting with the people and with his close companions. And he makes a statement to them to express how important it is not only to take, but to be a helper in this deen. What does he ask them? Man ansari ilallah. Which one of you are going to be my assistants in the cause of Allah? Yes, there might be people in that gathering who are taking from all of the goodness that a prophet has to offer, alayhi salam. But the key question that's being asked is, amongst you here, which one of you are going to rise to the occasion and are going to become assistants, helpers in the cause and service of Allah? Now that's enough as a historical marker for us to be able to take a lesson. But the Quran actually makes this much more clear. How does the Quran make this much more clear? Before even giving this example, the Quran makes a command and it addresses you and I. And what is that command? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Generally addressing you and I, all of the people who are claiming belief. O you who claim belief. Kunu ansar Allah, be among the helpers of Allah. Like Isa alayhi salam sought helpers amongst those who were around him. And that's the context of that historical example. Reminding you and I that this deen is built upon the sacrifices of those who rise to assist it. And this is a reminder that all of us must bear in mind. In fact, fast forward in history, and what you find is that this premise is so essential. This idea that there have to be people who sacrifice, who give in order to assist a mission. This is so essential that it forms the foundation of the Prophet ﷺ's hijrah and the founding of Al-Madinah. How is that the case? Many of you may be aware that when you talk about the surahs of the Quran, the scholars will often classify the surahs based on whether it was revealed in the Meccan period or if it was revealed in the Medina period. So there's a surah that's Mecca, there's a surah that's Madani, and it's based on which period of time it was revealed. Interestingly, the scholars point out that some surahs were revealed in Mecca, some verses and surahs were revealed in Medina. But there's one surah in particular that some of the scholars highlight was actually revealed in between. Meaning what's in between? During the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ, while he's making that transition from Mecca to Medina. Now when he's making that transition, the surah that we're referencing here is Surah Al-Mutaffifin. And it begins with a warning. Waylun lil mutaffifin. Woe be to those people who shortchange. And the scholars mention, based on narration, that this surah was revealed because one of the features of Medina was that a subset of people were shortchanging in their transactions. They would take more and they would give less. And this surah came because the taking of more and the giving of less was discordant with the coming of the Prophet ﷺ. Meaning that if in the community there was going to be this attitude of taking more and giving less. Now in this context, it deals with trading and it deals with cheating in trade. If there's going to be this attitude of giving more and taking less, taking less, taking and then giving less. If this is going to be the underlying marketplace, then it's discordant with the establishment of Medina and the coming of the Prophet ﷺ. Rather, what's necessary is that we take less and we give more. And in fact, this surah was so impactful that if you go to any marketplace today, you'll find that the Muslim merchant will always give an extra handful in exchange for whatever the amount of the transaction. I remember when I was studying in Damascus, I would go to purchase something in the market. Let's say it was dates, let's say it was bananas, and they would weigh it on a scale. And at the end of the transaction, they would always throw in an extra banana or throw in a few extra dates just to ensure that they gave more than what they took. But the scholars, they take this one step further. And they say this establishes a general principle in our deen, which is that in any transaction, we should always be those who give more than they take. In any transaction, we should always ask the question, what am I gaining? And am I giving back more than what I take? In fact, this then formed the foundation of all of Medina. So much so that the people of Medina themselves got the name Al-Ansar. Al-Ansar means what? The helpers. Means these were the people that gave everything that they had in order to be able to help to establish this deen. Their sacrifices and this idea that they had to offer everything that they had available to them in the context of the blessing of the Prophet ﷺ was so impactful that the Prophet ﷺ made some statements about them that is absolutely mind-blowing. For example, and just to scratch the surface, for example, what did the Prophet ﷺ say about the helpers of Medina? He said that a sign of belief is love for the Ansar. I'm paraphrasing here, but you can reference all of these in the chapter on the merits of the Ansar found in the book of Imam Bukhari. The Prophet ﷺ said, a sign of belief is love of the Ansar. On one occasion, there were a group of women and children coming back from what's said to be a wedding. When the women and children of the Ansar were coming back from this wedding, the Prophet ﷺ stood up. And what did he say? He said, you are the most beloved people to me, acknowledging the sacrifice of the Ansar. On another occasion, the Prophet ﷺ said, if it were not for the hijrah, I would have been from amongst the Ansar. In another circumstance, the Prophet ﷺ said, if the people went in one valley and the Ansar went in another valley, I would be in the valley of the Ansar. Towards the end of his mission, the Prophet ﷺ said to the Ansar that you will find after me that people will give others preference over you. You will find after me that people will give others preference over you. They will maybe fail to appreciate all of the sacrifices that you made. Be patient, was his advice to them. Because our maw'id, our place of gathering, our appointment, put it this way, our appointment is at Al-Kawthar, meaning I will meet you on the day of judgment based on your sacrifices. These were the characteristics not of any group of people, but of the helpers of this deen. And what allowed them, what were the features that led them to achieving this type of state? They sacrificed everything for the sake of Allah. They gave their time, they gave their wealth, they gave their sweat, they gave up their desires, their hopes, their aspirations, even their blood, recognizing that they had gained so much, but they had to give back so much more. That's the price of admission in this deen. And their example, and overlaid with the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, led generations of people to stand up and sacrifice for the sake of this deen. In fact, I don't need to quote you some long history. I could sit here and for 1 hour quote you example after example of how, based on this inspiration, not the geography of cities, countries, or states were changed, but the geographies of continents were changed. But I don't need to do that. I just need to ask you to look around at everybody in this room. Where did we come from? Many of us don't have to go far in our past to find that our forefathers were worshiping idols. Many of us don't need to go far looking around us to see that maybe some of us had been far from deen. We are a proof of the sacrifice of the people that came before us. And that's the purpose of tonight's mission. What is the purpose of this gathering? All of us in this room are benefiting from the institution of Darussalam. Every one of us have taken something. And when we take something, we are the first to raise our hands and say that we must give back much, much more. On one hand, you have the message of becoming a helper of the deen. And this command applies to you and I. And we have the inspiration of the companions before us and the great generations who did amazing things. But tonight, that is intersecting with something just as important. It is intersecting with our opportunity to support Darussalam. And we should not lose sight of that. Because imagine for a second, I could sit here and give you a lecture on how important it is to sacrifice and serve and give back more. But all of us might be left wondering, well, how could we actually do that? But subhanAllah, this is the most fortunate thing for us, that from the ashes of secularism has arisen this institution called Darussalam, which is a place that motivates and a place that inspires every one of us in this room. I mean, just think about it for a second. It's important to understand that these things don't come out by themselves. There's a lot of sacrifice that goes into producing any institution, let alone one at the caliber of Darussalam. Again, I'm not here to share the history, but all of you know just how special this institution is. Look, the foundations of our deen are built upon revelation, and it begins with the Quran. Darussalam is an institution that brings the Quran into the hearts and minds of so many of us that are in this room. Whether it's the memorization of Quran that occurs within its boundaries, whether it's the teaching of the meanings of the Quran that all the students are benefiting from, or even if it's the blessing of the umbrella of mercy that they place across the entire community simply by having so much Quran being recited and taught and learned within the institution. There is not one of us in this room that is not benefiting from the shade of the Quran at Darussalam. But it goes a step further. Beyond the revelation, they're also teaching the knowledge of deen. They're teaching the sunnah and the hadith and the wonderful understanding of our scholars. And so many of us have benefited from this in so many ways. Every time a scholar is produced at Darussalam, it affects not one person. It affects families, and it goes on to affect communities, and it goes on to affect the entire ummah as a whole. Yet Darussalam is not producing one scholar. They're producing dozens and dozens and dozens of scholars, each with their unique features and characteristics, each with their own abilities, and they're training these individuals to go out into the community and become additional helpers of this deen. But then, the current of Islam is the spirit that underlies Islam. Without the spirit that underlies Islam, words become empty and knowledge becomes information. Yet that current that's so essential and honestly is one of the hardest things to bring into any institution is vibrant in Darussalam. It is a bastion of spirituality where we not only go to gain information, but that information gets converted to knowledge. And you can go on and on and on. And perhaps just as a global reminder to everyone in this room, Darussalam is a community which we all call home. Do you know how hard it is to find a home? A place where we can belong? A place where we can come to at any time and feel welcome? a place where we can be ourselves and aim towards something much higher, that's what Darussalam provides. In fact, I can tell you that when you walk into the building, you're inspired. And everyone in this room can relate. You just have to walk into the building and you're inspired. And it doesn't restrict itself to the boundaries of the four walls. I have the opportunity to travel so many places, and I get to meet so many interesting people. I cannot tell you how many times people tell me about Darussalam. In fact, it's interesting. They not only ask me and tell me about Darussalam, but I can see that various masajid throughout the country, they've upped their game. They've recognized the need to bring in scholarship. They've recognized the need to inspire their community. They've recognized the need to build their institution because they see the progress that you have contributed to through Darussalam. This tide, this one institution has created a tide that is raising every single boat. SubhanAllah, it doesn't come out of nothing. It comes out of sacrifice. And all of us need to appreciate that. We would be lost if we didn't appreciate this opportunity. And again, I just want to say, Darussalam is not one individual. It's not a handful of individuals. It's not just the scholars or just the students or just the people who are serving. It's every one of us who are in this room, and even more so, it's every one of us who wish we could have been here. That's what makes up this institution. It's bigger than any one person. It's a unification of a whole bunch of hearts. And so today, my message is very simple. Everything that I said up till now is simply to lay down one central premise, which is do not miss the opportunity to participate in Darussalam. I'm going to repeat. Do not miss the opportunity to participate in Darussalam. We are a people who always appreciate what we take. In fact, all of Islam is predicated on this. We recognize everything that Allah has blessed us with, and we turn to Him in worship. It's a give and take. I recognize everything that I've taken from our blessed messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I follow his sunnah. It's a give and take. We are built upon appreciating all of the blessings that we have, and in turn, giving everything that we can in exchange. That's the opportunity that faces all of us today. It's this intersection of becoming a helper of Islam with the opportunity provided by Darussalam that's meeting here at a pinnacle in this gathering. So, as a final reminder, just to close, every one of us needs to make a commitment here tonight. I'm not going to ask you for any money. Money is easy. I'm going to ask you for something even more. Today, we are asking for your hearts to appreciate the blessing that Allah has bestowed upon us, and to turn around and say that in the context of this blessing, I'm not going to miss the opportunity to become one of the Ansar of Allah, one of the helpers of Allah. Every one of us can commit a heart. Allah has given us this heart, and every one of us has the ability to commit it. And with this heart should come time, if we're able to serve the institution, love for everything that the institution stands for, a good opinion of the efforts of the institution, and a desire to maybe hide the small mistakes that might occur along the way. And the wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon us, to give some of that in the service of Darussalam. Know that this life is a test. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you and I with some wealth. But that wealth is not a reward. Our rewards lie in Jannah. That wealth is actually a test. What is the test? All right, I gave this person $10,000. Let's see how they spend it. Do they pursue their desires of this world? Or do they see past this world and pursue the opportunity of Allah's pleasure and His lasting and permanent reward? That's what life is. It's a big test. Everybody in this room makes a claim. La ilaha illallah. Once we make that claim, life is a test to see whether we truly believe. Allah gives us a little wealth and tests us to see how we spend it. Allah gives us some time and tests us to see how we use it. Allah gives us abilities and tests us to see where we apply them. This is the simple summary of all of life. And that's what we all have to recognize in the context of the opportunity that sits before us today. So, with this opportunity, we should be careful not to let this pass. Because the mission of Darussalam is going to move forward. It's not, the question we're not asking here is who's going to be the helper. No, let me say it this way. The question we're not asking the question, are there going to be helpers? Allah is going to send His helpers. You can see it in the air. Go to Darussalam, see where it started, see what it is today. You don't need any other proof than that. But the question really is, which one of us will be among the helpers of Allah? Which one of us is going to rise to the occasion and appreciate the challenge that's facing us today? That's the simple challenge. That's a simple message. Again, I don't have anything lengthy to say, but I just want to thank all of you for all of the efforts that you've made in order to establish this institution, because there is no person in this room except that they are a piece of Darussalam. And so I want to thank every one of you for giving whatever you have given to this day. But I want to remind you that we're not done. We have opportunities to take this to the next level. But it's going to require every one of us to double down on our commitment. Yes, to double down on the sacrifices that we make, and to double down on the contributions that we give. I personally, Mufti Minhaj mentioned at the beginning that, I'm not a big dinner speaker. I can't remember the last time, honestly, I spoke at a dinner. I'm like, I got to be in my home court, which is like the masjid, It's hard for me to speak at a dinner. But I came here because I felt like if I didn't come here, I would have done a disservice to myself. I'm here because I want to participate just as much as you. That's how I felt. That's how strongly I felt about this opportunity. So I want to just pause for a minute. I want to thank Dr. Misbah, who honestly, Darussalam is decades before even the first ground was broken. He took from the people and the gatherings and the scholars and the opportunities, and he started planning from that day, how am I going to be able to take this one step further? Children were born not as children, but as an opportunity to produce one more person who's going to serve in the mission. I don't want to go into details, but I think it's apparent in just what I've said. And then all of the scholars here, beginning with Mufti Minhaj and Mufti Alvim and all of the other great scholars that are present, for all of the sacrifices that you've made. I could give a whole separate talk on how difficult it is to make the sacrifices that you've made, just to explain this to the community. But I appreciate it, and many of the community appreciate it, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for every single sacrifice that you've made. And then, as I've mentioned, to every person here who's made some contribution, whether that's through dua, or through your wealth, or through your time, or through your heart. And the only request here is to double down on those contributions, as I've mentioned before. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of our coming, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us as a united community to be able to raise an institution that will be a source of light, not just for our community, but for all of mankind, and will be a source of light, not just for us in this world, but as a source of light for us in this grave and on a much more difficult day. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.